So thank you very much all. So it was a quite interesting beginning to start with Professor Marco Guzman, our keynote speaker. So, but now we are going to start with the first panel. So for today, as you know, in our program, day one, we have a state and citizen. And I'm Rafael Martinez from the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities. On behalf of the center and of course my colleague Winston, I would like to thank you for joining us for the reimagining of the urban in the post-pandemic area workshop. So the workshop is envisioned as a platform to foster knowledge sharing and partnership opportunities between Southeast Asian and Latin American stakeholders. And this focus series, we will be exploring discourses on a diverse and broad range of emerging contemporary health issues brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I would like to welcome our online audience, both in Singapore and globally, students, friends, and colleagues of HUTD. And today I'm deeply honored to introduce our panelists. First is Professor Luis Angel Guzman from the University of Los Andes in Colombia. And we have, of course, Professor Sherwin from the Philippines, from University La Salle in the Philippines. I'm grateful to our panelists for taking time off their busy schedule to accept our invitation. So next, my colleague will explain, Winston will explain the modus operandi for this session. Winston?
Yeah, thank you, Rafael. So the structure for the panel will be as followed. The first 30 to 35 minutes will be a roundtable dialogue and question and answer between the moderator and the panelists. And the remainder of the time will be dedicated to Q&A with the live audience. So throughout the conversation, online participants can type in and submit their questions through the question and answer column through the Q&A panel, and we will visit those in the last 25 minutes of the session. Yeah. So we look forward to an invigorating dialogue session. And without further ado, I shall pass the time on to my colleague, Rafael, to kick off with the first question for our panelists.
Very good. Thank you very much. So let's start with this. As we said, as Winston has said, this is a conversation. So we are not really expecting, this is more like to explore topics, to explore ideas. So let me start with one question that we can start to start this exploration. So the question is this: we have seen regressions into authoritarianism, so in governmental efforts to contain the virus. Do the exigencies of the pandemic justify the systemic erosion of democratic ideals? And the second question is, corruption is another element that remains an underlying obstacle to the equitable distribution of essential resources. So the topics to discuss is, with regard to emergency response and democracy, how has the situation played out in your city over the past year? Who wants to start, Professor Ona or Luis Angel?
I don't know, you decide.
Well, I mean, it's up to you. So let me just repeat the question is, with regard to emergency response and democracy, how has the situation played out in your city over the past year? How about if we start with you, Luis Angel?
Okay, thank you, Rafael. Hello, Professor Wona. Hello, Winston, and thank you very much for the invitation. Well, Rafael, it's a very difficult and very tricky discussion, especially right now. I don't know if you know, but right now in Colombia, there are a massive strike in the whole country. Some cities are blocked, but I'm gonna talk about mainly to your question, what happened in the last year. Well, for the people who doesn't know very well Latin America or Colombia, the virus came here around early March, and immediately the national government locked down the complete country with a mandatory lockdowns, mandatory quarantines for 3 months. What's was a difficult measure. I think the at that time was the measure was obeyed by the most of the population, but that time we don't have so many cases, so many deaths by the virus, because I don't know, the virus just, I'm not an epidemiologist, but the virus just started. Right now, no. Especially in the end of the last year, at the end of the last year, we start to see a very complicated situation, because most of the country, most of the labor force of the country are in the informality. So what that means, they don't pay social security. They depend mostly of the subsidies for health insurance or for their employment insurance as well. So it starts to compete two different situations. By one side, most of the people, especially the poorest people, must to leave their houses to try to go out to work, to get something, some money or food for their families, of course. But in the other side, there were the national governments and the local governments about the mandatory quarantines. So here start I don't know, a contradiction between the life. I know you must to go out to get food, to get money, to work, and for the other side, if you get out, you probably get the virus. So it was very complicated. It was a very, very difficult situation, and of course the mandatory lockdowns, it's absolutely impossible to comply by and control, especially by the authorities, because I don't know, in a city, for example, in Bogota, where lives, I don't know, almost 8 million of people, it's impossible for the local force to control the whole city. It's absolutely impossible. And that was the mandatory lockdowns were accompanied by different measures. For example, all their restaurant shops were closed. You can, of course, all the other massive events also were canceled. If you have to go to the market, to the supermarket, to the food shop, you can go one day yes, one day no, depends to the last number of your personal ID. It's called here, I don't know if you know the restriction plate car in Bogota, but it's kind of same measure, because it's a restriction which depends of the last number of your personal ID. And it's and a lot of another measures where in the formal part of the city, the richest people obey the measures. But by the other side, a very, very large part of the city where the poorest people lives, who are the majority, of course, no. So it's complicated. So it's complicated that to I don't know, regarding again to the Rafael's question, to see the authorities versus democracy. So bottom line, to finish my first intervention, sorry, it's the people right now is tired by the mandatories, although right now we are in the third peak in the pandemic. Right now, just in Bogota, die around 500 people every day. Is the worst numbers that we have ever. The people are in the streets. We don't have right now any lockdown measures. The hospital are full, but the people are trying right now to make their normal life. And also regarding the vaccine, we only have vaccinated around, I don't know, I have to check right now. I will check, but around 10% of the population, or the oldest people, 17 years or older. So it's complicated, and I think that the people right now is tired. They don't obey the mandatory quarantines, and here right now, it appears to me that the people cares much more about their family economy, their jobs, their works, than the virus. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, thank you very much, Luis Angel. Professor Sherwin, what would you like? What are your ideas on this?
First of all, Rafael, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, Rafael, my sincerest gratitude to your team there at the center. Of course, to Winston and Harvey, thank you very much for having me for this very important event. If I'm going to treat, of course, to Dr. Guzman, greetings to you as well. If I'm going to treat Dr. Guzman's narrative as an exam, his points being the items in that exam, my answer will be, in a multiple choice, my answer will be all of the above. It's very similar here in the Philippines. We are still on a lockdown. Can you imagine? More than a year after our first lockdown, we are still on a lockdown. Just last month, March, we experienced another surge, and this was the deadliest surge so far. We were like registering 10,000, 11,000 infections a day, and a death rate of 300. Okay, and the government really scrambled. No, um, uh, it seems that we're back to square one. I guess the government today has relaxed a bit the restrictions, but without a solid public health response, I think that we'll be seeing another surge in the near future. But to your question, was there an erosion of democratic values, and how does this affect cities in particular? Um, Erosion of democratic values. The Philippines is, I think, a good case for that question, because we on paper declare ourselves as a democratic country, right? We have a constitutional democracy. But since the assumption of our current president, we have seen really, a penchant for strong, strong man rule. Our current president is a very populist president. He enjoys a widespread support among our people. In fact, even after this debilitating pandemic, he still registered like 70 to 80% approval rating. Of course, there are some people who are doubtful about this result, but it is what it is. People still approve of the way this administration is handling the pandemic. Now, uh, similar to Colombia, we underwent a general lockdown. So a nationwide lockdown, then followed by a regional lockdown. But lucky for Colombia, it was just 3 months. Our initial lockdown was 3 months, then it was extended for another 3 months. Okay, resulting in, of course, the lowest uh, productivity, or the highest economic dislocation that we have ever seen since World War II. Can you just imagine? The last time we're in this boat was 70 years ago during a world war. And now, aside from this economic dislocation, people are, well, we are experiencing a rise in hunger, of course, in poverty, okay? And our children are not able to go to school, okay? Of course, this has a huge economic repercussion. We don't know when they can come back. Our vaccination is, if Colombia has a 10% vaccination rate, we are roughly 5% only. Okay, so our public health response is not that great. So I believe that because of this situation and because of the novelty of this virus, government really, and because of its preference for strongman approach, no, a highly militaristic approach, government was really very open to implementing state of emergency. In my writings, I refer to this as a highly securitized, top-down militaristic approach. Okay, because it's in the nature of our leaders. And besides, this pandemic gave them a good opportunity to really show our people, given the anxiety and fear, that government is on top of the situation. That was the message. However, 1 year into the pandemic, we still have the same problems, Rafael. We still do not have a nationwide contact tracing system. Okay? Government will tell you we have. It was launched a few months ago, last March, but it's not 100% functional. So it's really highly doubtful that we can really get ahead of this virus, which has, of course, a lot of implication in an urban and even in rural settings, right? Um, you know that our national capital region and adjacent provinces hold 60% of our GDP. And if we are on constant lockdown, don't see the Philippines recovering from this pandemic soon. Our major factories are closed. Okay? Our major services are closed. Hotels are closed. Restaurants are closed. Okay? So it is but natural that all of our economic indicators will go down, and the development indicators will also go up. No, poverty will go up, hunger will go up, nutrition rates will go down. Okay, so this is where we're at right now in terms of the Philippines. And we've been doing studies about this, and it's highly noticeable that still on the top, no, at the top of our government, there is still this debate whether we approach this as a state of emergency military-like approach or a public health approach. Unfortunately, the stronger voices belong to the state of emergency military approach. Okay? Um, if we have lots of pictures about this, in online, no? And one of the prominent pictures there was when President Duterte declared the national lockdown last year. He was flanked by admirals and generals, and with only one doctor. Can you just, imagine the message that the government is conveying? No, this is a warlike scenario, and we will use the state security apparatus to quell this this viral invasion. That is the that is the mindset of our public officials now. And to make matters worse, the government still pursued its infamous war on drugs, and has enacted this law on anti-terrorism right in the middle of the pandemic. Can you just imagine? No? We have military officers doing left and right accusations. No, what we call this red tagging. No, civil society organizations, private individuals that are critical to the government were being tagged as communist. Can you just imagine? Okay, so I don't know a word that will describe this, no? But certainly we're not seeing, a clear light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. We're now, observing steady flow of vaccines. That is, of course, a very positive development, but it's still slow. We're still sourcing from COVAX, which is a donation-driven facility, right? And it's really not that stable, so to speak. No, it's subjected to the whims of donor countries. Um, well, our government is getting loans left and right, especially to purchase vaccines. But most of these vaccines are being sourced from China, no, the Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccine. Can you just imagine our government refused a 10 million dose donation from Pfizer back in January? It was not a donation, but it was being sold to us 10 million doses. Our government refused to buy those 10 million doses, and part of those doses went to Singapore, but it was first offered to the Philippines. Can you just imagine? Huh? So this is the political situation, and of course the overall situation in the Philippines right now. Thank you, Rafael.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Sherwin, and thank you, Professor Luis, for sharing of both the Philippines and the Colombian context. And I think Professor Sherwin mentioned an interesting point that I would like to pick up on. So you mentioned the difference between a military style and a public health approach. And it links naturally to our next question, where during health emergencies, is government accountability a disposable social conquest? And also, how do we draw the line between governing in a state of emergency and authoritarianism? So maybe we can start with Prof. Sherwin first for this round. Yeah.
Winston, thank you for that question. I believe that going into a highly militarized, highly securitized strategy to control the pandemic is unsustainable. First of all, it's open to abuse. All right. So I don't know if you're aware of the certain cases here in the Philippines where our police really took into heart the orders of the president to strictly impose the community lockdowns, resulting into shooting incidents, deaths. All right. There are also allegations of corruption. Okay. Unfortunately, plaguing our health institutions, being run by generals, so to speak. Remember, these are institutions being run by former military officers, retired military officers. So, militaristic approach, so to speak. No? Now, I said that it's not sustainable. Why? Because open to abuse, it's also very costly. And in the case of the Philippines, our security agencies were also not prepared. Okay? We looked at our national security policies, even the doctrines of our police and our military. They did not plan for pandemics. Okay? They did not plan for pandemics. The closest plan that they can get and use was the plan for disaster risk reduction, for typhoons and earthquakes. So when they use this plan and look at their inventories, they soon realize that we have inadequate PPEs. We have inadequate face mask. Okay? We are not prepared for a pandemic. Okay? Even our national security policies does not echo the importance of pandemics. No? In fact, when we reviewed it, the national security policy of the Philippines enacted during this administration, there was only 2 sentences devoted for pandemics. Can you just imagine 2 sentences in a 70-page agenda? Okay, so we were really caught off guard. No, even our security and police forces are complaining. Of course, they're not complaining publicly, but in our interviews, they were telling us that we were mobilized by our political leaders. But if you look at it, when you examine it closely, we're really not prepared. Okay, and your point about a disposable commodity, I believe that, to control this pandemic, it's really very important to get the trust and confidence of your citizens. Now, this is an indisposable commodity during times of pandemic. You know, we are, our greatest enemy here is not only the virus, but it's also fear, anxiety, and uncertainty among our people. Okay, people are getting hungry. And what will they do if they get hungry? Okay? They will go out of their houses and do many things, right? Some of them illegal. Okay? So that's I think that's where our government really, has an inadequate approach. The communication of our government in terms of this pandemic is really unidirectional. No, it's just one way. They're telling people, don't go out of your houses, we'll give you food, etc. We'll give you financial assistance, but nobody asks, do you need, what kind of food do you need? Will canned goods suffice? Eating canned goods for like a week. Can you just imagine how it tastes? No, perhaps 2 days will be just fine, but eating canned goods for a week, I don't think that will taste well, no, in the taste buds, right? Um, you know, the government implemented financial assistance amounting to X number of pesos, but did they ask if this amount is sufficient? When our civil society computed how long that amount will last, it's only for a week. And we've been on a lockdown for 6 months already when they got that financial assistance. So there is this disconnect, no? There is this disconnect, which is of course at the onset, in the surface, we see this as erosion of accountability. But I think it's more than accountability. It's really knowing what the problems are. Accountability, of course, is important, but first of all, we need to know what are the concerns of the people, especially during times of public health emergency. Okay, we are not at at a military conflict. Okay, but our preparation seems to be aimed at that. No, we have soldiers on our streets, but we lack doctors in our hospitals. Okay, so that's the irony. No, that's the irony. Thank you, Winston. Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you so much,
you.
Professor Lewis. So just to recap, so during health emergencies, is government accountability a disposable social conquest? And how do we draw the line between emergency governance in a state of emergency and authoritarianism? Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Professor Ona, because it's quite interesting because here in Colombia, the situation is completely the opposite. Our president has a very, very low popularity index right now, yeah, and the next year we have elections, so they are fighting again between the political parties about who is blamed because the virus, because the pandemic, because the poverty. But paradoxically, for example, last trimester, our GDP grows 1.1%, but at the same time, the monetary poverty index grows a lot. It's around 42% of the population is below that line. So it's weird because our GDP grows, but also the poverty grows. So what happened with the income distribution? What happened with the distribution of that wealthy, of that wealth? And that and also or with our poor attitude of our president, of our national government. Nobody pays attention to the government. Nobody believes in the government. The police are on the streets, but the people attacks the police forces. Here, the people set fire to the police station, particularly in this moment for the national strike. And the police, most of the cases, of course, there are violence cases in both bands, but the police also, in some occasions, kill some strikers, but we have also dead policemen, dead police officers. So it's interesting, the comparison, because between Colombia and Philippines, perhaps that authority, that extreme authority here is not happening, no? The people are tired, the people don't respect the government, the people don't respect the authorities. I don't know, perhaps because the bad planning, the bad decisions about the last year were, of course, as well in Philippines, the schools were closed, it's still closed. The National Union of Professors, they demand that all the professor and students must be vaccinated to go back to the classrooms, which right now, well, perhaps in 2023, 2024, we got all that population, especially the youngest population, vaccinated. And also they asked for I forget a nation, a basic rent for the poor population. And but at the same time, they don't want to pay taxes. So it's a completely crazy situation. And I think that situation is because, I don't know, 1 year of suffering, of people suffering, 1 year of everything closed, 1 year of mandatory lockdowns, because after the national lockdowns, the power was transferred to the local authorities, and they decide if they close their own city. Of course, a lot of lost jobs. And of course, especially right now, the rate of deaths, because the virus, it's highest than ever. So it's a very, very complicated situation, because right now it doesn't appear that our presidents gets the control of the country, because with the strike, some cities are locked. So in some places there are not enough food, because the food and the medical supplies, it's not allowed to move into the cities. It's not allowed to get to move the food and the medical supplies. And finally, I got to say something good. Our national health system accountability, it's good. Apparently, there are not big corruption acts, because all the vaccines that we have, we are distributed. They are distributed in the oldest population right now, but of course, of our vaccination rhythm right now is quite low. It's around, I don't know. I mentioned it before. There 10% of our population are vaccinated right now. I check, it's much lower, around 5%. But the accountability, it's clear. It's all online. You can check. You can talk with the local institution of health, and it works well, but it works very slow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Guzman. So I think this is a good time to open the floor for a Q&A. So we would like to hear if someone has a question. So among our attendees, any question or any comment you would like to ask or to raise? Well, let me start with this. I think it will be, this is a question for both, for Professor Guzman and Professor Ona. So I see, for example, comparing the case of Colombia, comparing to the case of the Philippines, I see that there is like the opposite from the point of view of society. Like in the case of Colombia, we have like really like a very embattled kind of society, which is challenging the government and saying we are tired of this situation, not only about the pandemic, but we are tired of this regime. And the society has been, I mean, has managed to express this anxiety and this also tiredness of being just like a ruled by a government which has been clearly very inefficient. In the case of the Philippines, we have a very organized society, but they are not able to express this, I mean, this concern, or maybe they are, I don't know, probably too tired to do that after 6 months, as Professor Ona just said. So my question is, why do you, I mean, now that you know the case of Colombia, and now that you know the case of the Philippines, what will be the difference, the main difference between these perceptions of society? Would you like to start, Professor Ona? What will be your interpretation of what makes a Colombian society, or Bogota society, or urban Colombian society different to the Philippines? And later we pass the mic to Professor Guzman in the last minutes.
Perhaps, Rafael, if I may, getting insights from Dr. Guzman, I think they were able to open their economy earlier than us. And this allowed for citizens to to express their concerns to government. And I think I might be wrong. Um, their government is more open to criticism. Um, they don't have what we call here in the Philippines trolls. That when you post something critical of the government, an army of online trolls will descend upon you and threaten to rape you and kill your family. Okay, so I think they do not have that. People here are, of course, in the Philippines, we're afraid of the virus and we are afraid of being tagged as a subversive. So perhaps that's the reason why people, well, Filipinos don't protest that much. Okay, unlike what we've heard from Dr. Guzman, Colombians are more expressive. In the Philippines, I believe that we have a very high compliance rate in terms of minimum health standards. People listen to government in the Philippines. Fortunately for us, no. But again, when government gives mixed messages, okay, when government itself admits that their data is not accurate, okay, when government itself will tell you that, all right guys, unfortunately we do not have a record of all our people, okay, so just wait for a while and government assistance will be there, okay, even though we do not have a record, which undermines transparency and openness, okay, and furthers corruption, allegations of corruption. So what will you do? Okay. Nowadays, people are resorting in the Philippines, we are resorting to volunteerism. I don't know if you have read what we termed here as community pantries. People are now donating. People are, organizing spaces, open spaces, and donating food. Okay. This has been a phenomenon in the last month. No, it has spread throughout the Philippines, but the government instead of praising this bottom-up initiative, they resorted into tagging the organizers as subversives. Okay? So that is the situation here. And perhaps that is the reason why people are not really disposed on protesting or being, expressive of their sentiments, unlike what's happening in Colombia. Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you very much, Professor Ana. Luis, any comment from your side?
Yes. It's interesting because it looks like that Colombia and Philippines are in two opposite sides. Because here it seems that the people will like a little more control about the strikes, the protests, and all that kind of thing. Because a lot of people feels here that the government in some places doesn't have the control. The people, as I mentioned, the people doesn't respect the authorities, doesn't respect the police. So perhaps this both situations show us that all the extremists are completely bad. No, we have we trying to seek, we trying to negotiate perhaps a middle point to trying to balance exactly the conversation terms that about this conference between democracy and control. To control to what? To, of course, to trying to slow down the virus spread. So it's interesting, and also I think that about this situation between our countries, I think a very important issue is the huge inequality among our population. I think the inequality could be worse than the poverty, where a lot of people see that very few segment of the populations enjoy a lot of luxury, food, the power, the media, whatever. I think that's it's gonna be a timing bomb about I know it's a very social issue in our countries that for sure our governments someday trying to aim policies, social policies, to trying to close the gaps in our societies. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question by Mr. Stephen Ellis. So this was brought up by Marco in the keynote, but in Indonesia, there has been a little conflict and some contradiction between policies and messaging from the national government and the Jakarta government in particular. The Jakarta government also exerts quite a bit of influence politically and has a decent amount of actual power. I'm curious to hear a little about how the local government in Manila and Bogota, and excuse my lack of familiarity with the local governance structures, might be acting different, challenging, or contradicting the central government, if at all. Thank you. Yeah. So maybe we can start with Professor Guzman first.
Okay, thank you, Winston. Well, it's a complicated question, if perhaps it's quite easy to answer after a year of pandemic, but perhaps seeing this after taking decision after the game, after we lose the game, perhaps I recommend to the local authorities don't make so strict and general lockdowns at the beginning of the pandemic, because we closed everything, all things, schools, shops, everything during 3 months. Perhaps this was quite difficult to the economy, and especially was very harmful. We have a couple of papers about that for the poorest people of that. Perhaps the the recommendations at that time was to try to make a local and partial closes. Do not, of course, we know right now, use the mask all the time. We use the ventilation measures, and of course, to accelerate the vaccination arrangement with the country, with China, European Union, UK, USA, because, for example, our government delayed a lot the negotiations about the vaccination, the vaccine with China, because that vaccine was not approvable in the Western Hemisphere. For example, Chile approved the vaccination before before us, and they have very better rates of vaccination among their population. So, Stephen, yes, that is my. I'm not expert in rural, so quite and huge big cities, but perhaps my first recommendation was not close completely the city at the beginning of the pandemic.
Very good, Luis. Thank you so much, Professor Ona. So your final comments before we finish this first panel.
I think, thank you for that. I think a clear takeaway here from the experience of the Philippines, of course, will be there's really a need to strengthen the capacities of local governments, especially in the areas of public health and, of course, addressing outbreaks and even pandemics. As I've told you, the Philippine response was mainly a top-down response. And not only top-down, but most of the laws that were used were geared towards disaster response. And of course, local governments were left at a quandary here, no? Because well, it's one thing to deal with the disaster, and it's one thing to deal with, a pandemic. So in terms of capacity, in terms of preparation, in terms of resources, I believe that there is, a lot to address when it comes to moving forward, or giving local governments the capacity to mitigate an outbreak. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. If we don't have any other questions, so I would like to thank Professor Ona and Professor Guzman for your participation in this first panel opening our workshop. So we would like to invite you, Professor Ona and Luis. We know that in Colombia it's too late, but probably later you can check, that because it's recorded. So we have our next panel is a Nationalist Economic Response and Measures, which will be led by Ika Fernandez from the Philippines and Natarun Ngo from Cambodia. So that will be in 1 hour time. So we would like to thank you very much all for attending, for being part of this workshop, and we look forward to having you in the next sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you again for the invitations.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Winston,
Bye-bye.
Dr. Guzman.
Thank you.
Stay well.
Professors. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.